welcome to Friday. Friday, very exciting day. It's been an awesome day this week. More and more of you have actually, and Leland doesn't even know this yet, more of you have been watching this training, and it's resonating with a bunch of you. We're selling more people coming into that extra third week of training. We're going to be doing React Native, so it's kind of exciting. Every day we kind of keep getting a couple more people and a couple more people. It's awesome. So Leland has been killing it. So welcome to fmtraining.tv. So I guess for those of you who are brand new here, who just fell off the hay wagon yesterday, this is all about the FileMaker platform, mostly, right? And so we're talking about how we use FileMaker. We solve business problems with it. There's different levels of a skill set as I talk about this. And so I'm going to bring this up real quick. This is the progression of learning. So we talked about this quite a bit. So you have professional developers in this kind of right side over here, we call Pro Code. The reason we mention Pro Code is because Claris and some of these other companies run around going, it's all about no code or it's low code. And it's like, it's ho code. Like what? And so, if you have someone who doesn't know anything about computers and computer science and technology and databases, then drag and drop no code or something like that's great. FileMaker platform does offer some of those kind of capabilities to get into it very simply, but it can get advanced. And if you want to push into the world of advanced development, one of the routes you can go down is with JavaScript. And so what we did is starting this week, Leland, who is a professional instructor at different parts of his life, is really great at training, and he started us off on Monday with, or actually not this Monday, the week before Monday, right? 2 weeks ago. I said a week, but it's been 2 weeks now. Today's day 9. Next Monday is day 10. Will be the last day of the free training, and so he started us off at basics and moved us progressively along. He is a fantastic developer. A lot of people are very interested in seeing what he has to say in week 3. So if you go to fmtraining.tv, so once again, this is the kind of the beginning side, intermediate side, mostly the people we're talking to in this live stream. Some of you are advanced people, some of you are beginner basic people. But taking advantage of being a senior certified developer, you're going to do Ajax, JSON, ODBC, SQL, JavaScript. We probably should update to say JavaScript, but some sort of additional deeper technology that extends the FileMaker platform further, farther, faster. Very, very true. So, and I can show you lots of examples of that. The calendars, a lot of the interactive calendars that we have in FileMaker are driven by JavaScript. So very cool. So real quick, if you go to fmtraining.tv, the website right here, you can see the upcoming broadcast schedule here. So today is day 9, Monday's day 10. Then also Monday after this, after the free training here, we're starting the paid training about an hour or so, hour and a half, 2 hours, whatever it is, after this broadcast, after this event ends right here. And so that every day you'll have a Zoom a link if you pay for that training to come to that. If you're not going to pay for the training and you just want only free training, only free all the time, then you're going to be return of Nick. Nick will be here on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Some of you have been saying, hey, you missed Nick. He will be back Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And Christian Schmidt on Monkey Bread will be here on Friday. If you come over here on this website, that's a live schedule. You can press the right side and see the JavaScript training. And so you come up here. This is the live training. So we're at day 9, day 10 of live training. And then we will be starting part 2 with the paid training, which is the React Native framework, I guess. Is it better to call it a framework, Leland? What do you think?
I think so.
Okay. Yeah, we don't use the word framework in here, but really it's just what it is. It's people, I've got a number of emails saying, hey, is it Windows or is it Mac or is it Android? And they're trying to figure out which platform it is. It's actually Mark Zuckerberg. And he doesn't really care about platforms other than Facebook is what he cares about. Or Meta or whatever his new Meta World thing he's trying to create. They built this React Native so they would have an easy way of building a Facebook front-ending application on iOS and Android, right? And so he builds it once and he can take it on iOS and Android. He doesn't care about iOS. He doesn't care about Apple. He doesn't care about Android and Google. He's got his own company. He just wants to build it once and take it to those places. So that's what he is doing. So very, very exciting.
The business catchphrase for React Native is learn once, write anywhere.
There you go. Learn once or write anywhere. Well, that's exactly what's going on here. So that is what's happening with what we are doing Monday afternoon, and it'll be the paid training. So if you want to learn how to, at a professional pro code level, once again, back to this, if you want to be this senior ninja level person here, That's where we're going to be, well, everything you've been learning for the first 2 weeks is applicable. You need to know those things. And then we're going to take the next step of taking that, that JavaScript and putting it into the framework and being able to create applications for iOS or Android. Pretty awesome. So if you're interested in that, you can come down here. You can buy the training if you'd like to do that. Then you'll get a confirmation email where you can visit with Zoom. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand this off to Leland. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. So Leland, what are we doing? And it's day 9, it's Friday.
Okay, so we've been dealing with the JavaScript library PDF lib library, and hopefully you all have had a chance to download and take a peek under the hood for PDFEditor and follow along if you wish. What we've been doing the last few days is starting small, working our way up. We made it so that we had a web viewer with a basic beginner PDF single page document with some text on it. We added a function to be able to get the size of a new document. And last but not least, yesterday we finished up with adding some text. So that's, if you recall what that looks like, you hit a knit up here, get size is optional, hit add text, and Richard in 12-point font shows up here at a 45-degree angle.
Yes.
We provided X and Y positions here in our local fields and the text that we wanted to add. And it's still interesting to note that all of this is all working with a found count of 0 records. So you can that'll kind of help you understand a little bit the context behind what we're doing. We're basically dealing with no context, right? Just the context of this layout rather than one record. Interesting. All right, so as for the code for this, what we've been using is an optional tool called Visual Studio Code. We started that 2 days ago. And what that does is we can write this anywhere, right? We can write it in a text editor. What I've been doing a lot up until now is inside of an insert text in FileMaker is just hand typing code, right? And here's our JavaScript. So we can hand type it here. We can do anything, but this just gives us, so there's no colorization. The indentation is what I've put in with spaces. But in Visual Studio Code, it does a lot of things for you, including colorizing it. And I'm going to show you a couple other tricks here before we get started. This code snippet is what we're looking at with where we ended up, which was adding text to the screen. So we have 3 functions in our JavaScript. So let's go take a look at those over here in Visual Studio Code. And one of the things you can do is you can collapse lines. So for instance, if I hit this little triangle here at the beginning of line 6, it collapses all of the code for that PDF editor create function. So it's all still in there. We haven't lost anything, but you notice it jumps from lines 5, 6 to 56, 57. And we can toggle that and see it all back again. So that's one thing we can do. And if we do that on all 3 of our functions, you'll see here's all of our code minus all the details. So this kind of shows you the structure of like the root level of how our code is looking inside this huge insert text block that we can scroll through and see. But the more you start to put in here, the more confusing it gets, right? Especially for beginners. And so maybe collapsing lines sometimes actually can help you kind of wrap your head around what's going on. So here's our 3 functions we've got so far with our import of library objects here and our declaration of our global variable here. So here's our first function to create a PDF. Here's the optional function to get size. And here's where we add the text. And that matches our 3 buttons here on the layout. Boom, 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 right? Collapsing and expanding is kind of a nice little option that is something useful that you might find useful in Visual Studio Code. Now, if we expand just one of these, and let's see, what's the opposite of expand? Collapse. Thank you.
Collapse.
Yeah, if we collapse our sub function inside, and if we collapse our catch and our then, you can see how our one function right here, whoops, I selected one too many. Here's our one function right here showing a little bit more. This shows the root function that runs, right? It doesn't show us any of the sub function code, and it's not showing us all the things that we're doing when it triggers a then or a dot catch. So now you can see that we have our function, we have our child or sub function called get size, but really this get size right here just runs these 2 lines of code, which is declare a variable called PDF and run a sub function called get size. Now I'm calling it sub function just to try to help you wrap your head around it. Out in the JavaScript world, they don't call it a sub function. So try not to get confused there. I probably will try to stop using that term. Get size is simply a function that's declared up here.
Okay.
Or right here, sorry, selected the wrong thing. So now if we take a look at what happens when .then is triggered, by expanding that, you can see it runs 2 lines of code, a console log and a call to FileMaker.
Okay.
And if we collapse that back up and look at .catch, 2 lines again, a console log and a call to FileMaker. So yeah, that expand and collapse can actually be kind of useful to try to, especially as a beginner, to try to understand when you start to see a lot of code all blurred together, you kind of start to get the deer in the headlights look, right? It's like, that I'm just looking at too much. It's a foreign language and I'm kind of lost. So hopefully this kind of gives you a little bit of a tool that you can collapse and expand things to try to wrap your mind around really kind of the structure of what we've got going on.
Okay.
So with that, again, we've got 3 functions, and all 3 of these are all built with the same type of structure. So if I collapse this, and collapse this, you'll notice that this looks identical to what we just looked at in get size. And it's the same thing with our add text function. So I'm keeping the structure almost identical, just changing it where it's necessary. Like here, we've got just a few more lines of code here before we run our modify PDF function right here. So I had to declare 4 variables to pass them in as parameters. So it looks a little bit different than the other ones, but it's still the same structure, right? So, all right, enough of that. We're done with adding text. Let's move on to the next
What
section,
I'm
which is
thinking is
adding an image.
having that, using that application to write scripts would be the way to go.
It's got some advantages for sure. Yeah,
Visual
but I would
Studio. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead. I'm listening.
I would definitely recommend that you not use it while you're doing JavaScript 101, because that is good to stay within FileMaker so you don't add any of the complexity or options that Visual Studio Code gives you, because you're wanting to learn just the basic JavaScript. Keep it simple there. But once you start getting a few of your JavaScript chops, then move on to some tools that can help speed things up for you.
So this is Visual Studio right here that we're looking at, correct? Yes.
Yes, Visual Studio Code.
Who Visual Studio Code? Who owns this?
Made by Microsoft.
Okay, there you go. So it's Microsoft. So is this considered a standard, or is that like asking a geek what his favorite sci-fi movie is, and they pull out knives and start trying to kill each other between Star Trek and Star Wars or Marvel or something, right? So
yeah, there's several options out there. I mean, in the Apple world, Xcode is your IDE, your integrated development environment.
That won't roll because it's only for Macs, right? So I'm saying if I kind of really climb on the bandwagon of yelling at Claris about an app that they should support in this, or somehow figure out how to integrate with, I'm wondering what that should be. Just I'm talking out loud, but yeah, I'm off.
I used to use an app called Atom, and it was made by GitHub, and I used that for quite a while, but they've discontinued that. It had a lot of similarities to some Visual Studio Code, but I think Visual Studio came up with a lot more options, and now that it's actually still being supported and Atom is not, that's kind of a case all by itself. So that's kind of why I slowly moved away from Atom and moved towards Visual Studio Code, because I heard a lot of other developers using it. And if you do a lot of YouTube video watching for JavaScript examples, that seems to be fairly predominant. So.
Oh, okay. Okay. And it works great on Mac, obviously, because you're on a Mac platform and it's working great for you.
Correct. Matter of fact, if you kind of recall when we first introduced this tool, I kind of made the pun that you can use it as long as you have Mac, Windows, or Linux.
Yeah, I remember that joke.
That's pretty much all there is.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So it works on everything.
And it's basically free, right? So, okay.
Yes.
That's shocking for Microsoft.
Yeah, little plug for them. Okay. So our next section is adding an image. So let's play with it first. So first, we're going to initialize our code and get an initial PDF here with 1 page and some text. We'll just trigger the get size. It's optional, but now we know the dimensions of this page. And now we're going to add an image. I've already dropped a signature in here with some background so that it's not all white. And this particular image is a PNG image. So we're going to define that there, and then we're going to give it a position, X and Y coordinates. Let's go ahead and keep the scale at 100%. And let's change rotation to 0 with an opacity of 1 and add the image. Now you can kind of see why I scaled it. Yeah. It's a really big image, right? So if I clear that and change the scale to 0.5 and maybe move the X position back quite a ways, and maybe let's lower it a little bit down to 100 and hit add image. Oh, okay. Well, that's 50% scaled. Now you'll notice how clean it still looks. If you zoom in on that, the resolution is beautiful.
Okay.
So that's one of the advantages to a PDF format, right?
Mm.
Is it helps you with resolution. Yeah, now it's not going to help if you have a really tiny image and you try to scale it up. That's a different story all by itself, right? So everybody's probably getting kind of used to that over the years.
Mm.
So anyways, this particular image is still way large in size. Let's drop it down to 25%, clear it, rerun it. Okay, now it fits on the page. But you can see how easy it is to do something that's not easy to do otherwhere without specific tools, which is things like rotation. Add that image with opacity. Now it looks really dim, 10% opacity. Okay, so that's a pretty powerful feature for our PDF editing, I think.
Yeah.
Now, what did it take to do that in code? Well, surprisingly enough, it's not a whole lot different than adding text. Matter of fact, if we look at our populate web viewer, I don't think anything's changed. We're still doing the same thing we have before.
Okay.
And if we look at our JavaScript code, let me copy that, move it over to Visual Studio Code, just replace it all. If we start at the top, there's our create. Looks like we still got, oh, it kept the code collapsing. That's interesting. So let's re-expand it. So there's our create. I don't think anything's changed there. Looks like we are, yeah, I wonder if there's a global expand all. I think option did it. Option clicking on one of those doesn't expand all, and well, it's not really all. Looked like it was 2 steps because now everything's collapsed. And if I do it again, I think we're good.
Okay.
So anyways, here's our create PDF function, which I don't think has changed. And if so, we'll look at it again. Here's our get size, which I don't think has changed. And here's our add image. Now, I think what I did in this particular example is I wiped out the add text just so we don't get too much code in here. In the final PDF editor, of course, it's all in there. But here, since we're just adding an image, I think I removed the add text code. So we still have the create, we still have the get size, but now everything from here on down is going to be the same. Okay, PDF editor, add image. Now this one takes in a whole bunch of parameters, 2, 4, 6, 7 of them. Now what code editor or code Visual Studio Code did is it separated them into separate lines. Now, you know, that's optional, right? Spacing, returns in certain circumstances, those are all optional.
Yeah.
And pretty much what the rule is and what I found is there's a certain character limit going across horizontally, and I forget what the number is, but as soon as it gets past a certain number, you'll notice nothing really goes past this point. And the code editor is just going to start wrapping things in whatever way that it can, in a legal way for code to not booger up, but it's going to do some word wrap and function wrap so that nothing gets longer than about right where my mouse is. Okay, so the editor's doing that, and it's optional. If you were doing that in the text editor in FileMaker, it's not going to do that for you, right? You'll just have really long lines, and that's totally fine. So in this case, with 7 parameters, it shoved them all to separate lines. Now, here's another thing that's kind of nice with Visual Studio Code. If you click on a parenthesis or a curly brace, or right next to it, the system automatically highlights the corresponding matching open or closing parenthesis.
I really like that.
Which is really helpful when you start to have code that goes across multiple lines. For example, this add image function, if I move my cursor there and have it blinking there at that curly brace, I can scroll down and see where the ending matched pair is right there at line 165. And I can't put both on the screen without code collapse, right? But if I do code collapse right here, now I can see them both. So that's really handy when you start to get a lot of nesting involved and indentation with a code block inside of a parenthesis, inside of a code block, inside of another code block, inside of another code block, and you start getting more and more and more indents. Being able to figure out if you've got a matching parenthesis or brace, it's kind of like if-then statements and loops in FileMaker scripting, right? Everything indents. It's really nice to be able to see, to make sure that you have everything matching the way that it's supposed to, so it doesn't booger up. Or you end up putting a code block inside of a section that you didn't mean it to be in, simply because you were miscounting the endpoints. So that's another really useful item. So if we collapse this, what I'm calling again a subfunction, let's just look at just the PDF editor add image. We've got our parameters. Scrolled on me, sorry about that. We have our function inside of a function, and there's my comments to kind of help visually break that apart. And here's what our main function does to add an image, all of this. Now that looks like a lot, but if you remember down here, these .then and .catch is the response to our async function called add image. So let's collapse those. Now it's starting to look a lot more readable, right? This is a little easier to digest.
Yeah, much smaller.
To help you understand, okay, I'm only doing two things in this function. It's taking up a whole bunch of lines. The first thing I'm doing is declaring a variable right here. And the second thing I'm doing is calling that function. That's all it's doing. That's all this function does. But with all of this code, sometimes it's easy to get lost, especially as a beginner. And it's like, oh, that's doing way too much. I'm lost. So that's why this time I'm trying to kind of break this down into chunks to show you that this function right here only does two things, line 169 and 179. And everything else is just parameters or information for those two things that it does. Okay. So the first thing I'm doing is declaring a variable called JSON parameters, and I'm creating my own custom object. Okay. Now, why am I doing that? Well, take a look at what the code looks like for bringing 7 parameters into this function. I need all 7 to be passed to this function. So again, I would have to pass 7 into the, well, now I only pass 1. How did I do? I need all 7. So how did I convert 7 into 1? Made my own object with all of those 7 parameters inside of it. So that's why I did that. Now I purposely named them differently just so that I don't mess myself up for scope. Okay. So incoming is image type, and my custom parameter object, I'm going to call it type. My where X is going to be called POS X, so position X. So I'm purposely renaming them. Well, I didn't rename all of them, did I? Didn't rename the scale, or rotation went to rotate. So and opacity stayed the same. So I kind of changed them, but hopefully you get the point. Yeah. I passed that entire object into that function so that I can parse those out and use them. So hopefully that makes sense. That shouldn't be too complicated, right?
No.
It would be, wouldn't it be? That's what we do in FileMaker, because FileMaker only allows one parameter. It has since day one. For the last 30,000 years, Claris only allows one parameter to a script. So how have we solved that? Over the years, we've played all kinds of tricks. And the one that I'm using currently, and maybe you all are too, is I'm passing in a JSON object so that I can have as many things inside there as I want.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm kind of mimicking what I do in FileMaker. I'm creating a JSON object, kind of a JavaScript object, and I'm passing it into my function, which is synonymous with a script. Okay, so let's look at the function. Let's uncollapse it right here. The first thing I do is the same thing I did yesterday, is I dump all of those parsed parameters into the console log so I can see them. That's excellent for debugging, because then I know that before I do anything with those parameters, that I'm actually getting what I'm expecting to get with the correct names, right? Now, how do I parse out the individual parameters from that object? It's that dot syntax you've seen many times before. So to parse the type, let me see if I can see it on the screen. No, it's clear down here at the bottom. So I can use that up here. How do I parse out the type from this incoming object? It's right here. The name of the object, the params, dot type, the key that I want to pull out of that object. Here's the key for the X position. Here's the key for the Y position. Here's the scale, here's the rotate, and here's the opacity. And why does this look so funky? Because I'm passing it into one console log, all of those parameters. Text, value, separated by commas. And hopefully you can look at that and kind of, okay, I get it. So these two kind of go together, but then I add a comma and I add these two more to it. I'm just concatenating. I'm passing in more optional parameters to the console log function is technically what I'm doing. And hopefully that's not too confusing. Okay, so that dumps all of my values to the console log. That's great. Now what am I doing? Well, now I'm loading the PDF that already exists. I'm not creating a new one. And we covered yesterday how I'm doing that, right? Way at the top, I've got a global variable called global PDF doc. And when my add image first runs, right down here is where I pass to my function that PDF doc. There's the global. I pass it into my object with that key value pair, PDF doc. So in my function comes in here. I'm not going to dump that to the console log. That's an object. Who knows what kind of garbage I'm going to get with that? But I'm using it right here. There's how I'm parsing out that global PDF doc that I passed into the function. Here's where I'm pulling it out, and I'm loading that with my library and storing it in my PDF doc variable. Now we've done that for the last 2 days, so hopefully that's not confusing. Okay. Once I have my document object, then I get all of the pages from it, and that stores it into this variable here, which is going to be an array of all of my pages. And then I'm interested in just the first page. So here's how I grab the first page. I ask for pages and the 0 index of the array. Grabs the first page. All of that is what we did yesterday with adding text to the document. So here's actually where things change. Here's where we actually start to work with an image object. And you remember how previously we embedded the font into the document? Now we're going to embed the image. Now, each image has a different function call. Let's take a look at that over in the documentation. So if we go into documentation, we go to pages because we pulled the zero index page. So we have a page that came back. And if we look at the option to embed, oh, I don't see any embeds. Is it not coming into a page? No, it's in the doc because we're embedding in the document. So it's in the document, not the page. There it is. So this is how we embed a font, right? But now here you can embed a JPEG, you can embed a PDF, you can embed a PNG. So for my 2 image types, that's why I picked JPEG and PNG. So for PNG, here's what the code looks like right here. And it's going to expect 3 possibilities: a base 64 encoded PNG image, or raw bytes in this type of array, or in a buffer. So from FileMaker's container, I can pass in a base 64 encoded string from my image sitting there in the container. So where did we do that? Well, when we add the image function script, this is where we're going to pass a whole bunch of stuff from FileMaker to JavaScript. So right here is where I compile all of those into variables. Here's that image type, which on the layout was this right here, where I have to pick PNG or JPEG. Then here's where I encode the image. I use the function, FileMaker function base 64 encode RFC with this container field right here. And you'll have to look on documentation as far as what the different options are for FileMaker RFC, but I use 3548, which is, I think, kind of a standard out there. But look at FileMaker's documentation for that one.
Okay.
It'll
We
be
have
on
a
this
question
class.
here when you get past this. You ready for a question?
Not quite yet, almost.
Okay, keep going.
But I'll, yeah, good to know that I have a question pending. Okay. So here's where I grab from my other fields, the X and Y position, the scale, the rotation, and the opacity, and I store them in variables. Down here, this is nothing but validating those variables and making sure I have valid values. For instance, for scale, I require it to be between 10 or 0.1 and 10 or something like that. Or I'm from 0.1 to 10 is what I'm restricting the scale to. And I think for opacity, it has to be between 0 and 1. So this is simple validation for data. And then I'm just simply calling my function in the web viewer, passing in those parameters right there. Now, what was the question, Richard?
Andy says, if you call the function and forget a key in your object, are you able to get back the correct error messages? ?
Basically, what you're doing there is a user error or a developer error. Basically, it's kind of synonymous with you've got a function that's expecting 3 parameters and you're only giving it 2. You're not going to get your expected results. And the compiler cannot help you figure out what you did wrong. It has no idea. It's simply following your instructions, and you goofed because the instructions you gave it are not accurate. So what's the best solution for that? Right here. Dump those parameters into the console log so that you can see what came in as the type, what came in as the X position, what came in as the scale. That will tell you if you got something wrong, out of order, didn't name it correctly, what have you. So no, the compiler can't tell you what you did wrong there.
Okay.
That would be synonymous with you expecting a parameter in a script, but you forgot to pass the parameter in. FileMaker can't help you figure that out. Good question, though.
That's a good question. Yeah.
So hopefully everybody sees now how I passed all of those variables that we captured here in these fields into JavaScript when I hit add image. That should be fairly straightforward. This is where all of that's happening, right here, all 7 options. Okay. And like we just discussed, I'm bringing those in, those come in, then I'm creating a custom object to pass in all of those parameters to my sub function, or this function here. They're coming in as an object, and then I'm immediately dumping those to the console log so that I can see them. That's kind of the separate steps that I'm taking to get all of those parameters in, all in the right order, all in correctly named parameters so that I can use them down here.
Let's see. And he says, if you call it's on Discord, if you want to look at it, if you call the function and forget a key in your object, that's the one. The next question, when you set a function to have 3 parameters and only give 2 when I call the function, the compiler tells me that the variable is undefined, so I know where the error is. With just 1 and a try catch, I don't think the compiler tells you which key is missing.
Well, here's what would happen is, let's say, for instance, that I forgot to pass in my opacity. I'm trying to use it right here. Matter of fact, I'm trying to ask JavaScript that I want a key value pair out of this object. It's going to either quietly fail or it's going to give me a undefined problem, because I'm trying to pass undefined into opacity of this draw image function. So I very well might get an error there, and that would show up in the console log. But you're that may or may not happen if you miss a parameter, or worse yet, if you just accidentally reverse rotate and opacity, they both take same value, 0 to 1. So you might have said rotate 45, opacity 1, and you're just going to get different results. You're not going to get any errors. Compiler's not going to have any problem with it. You just accidentally got them in the wrong order. So that's where that console log comes in useful yet once again. So yes, I guess the answer is yeah, you may or may not get a compiler error.
Okay.
When you booger things up. All right, back to embedding PNGs and JPEGs. So in our documentation, you can see that in embedding PNG is a completely different method than embedded JPEG. They both take the same optional data, but they're 2 separate methods. So I actually in code have to figure out, well, which one am I going to use? So right here, I used a how do they pronounce it? Tertiary, that ES6 option for if statements that I told you may or may not work in FileMaker. And I think the limitation now, I think I've been told that FileMaker version 19.3 onward is ES6 compatible.
Oh, okay.
So that might be the minimum version for this PDF editor to actually work. If you're using 19.1, oops, adding an image might not work. And if so, this is probably the culprit, because I'm using a tertiary right here.
Tertiary.
So how do you read a tertiary? Tertiary, thank you.
Tertiary.
So how do you read that? If you look what I've got highlighted here, let me zoom in on it. What this is it's a unique and strange way to rewrite an if statement. That's all it is. And what it is this is the condition. So in FileMaker, this would be your first parameter in your if function. And instead of separating that with a semicolon, you put a question mark, and then between the question mark and the colon, this is your if it's true, do this. And the colon designates the if it's not true, do this. And then you end it with a semicolon. So a tertiary is just that question mark, colon, No if, no parentheses, no brackets for code blocks, no else in the middle of it. It's just a shorthand version of writing an if statement. That's all it is. So I used it right here. So what does this mean? This means if my incoming type is PNG, what's the incoming type? That's this field right here.
Oh,
It's radio button. You had to pick one, right? So it has a default, so it won't break things. So if the user doesn't change anything, at least I won't get an error here. So if it's a PNG, do this, which is embed the PNG with the incoming base64 encoded image data that came from that container. And if it's not PNG, just embed it as a JPEG. So that's pretty simple, right? But that's how I used that, and that's how I did it. And we used a tertiary for the first time. And here's how you apply scale to the image. There's a function for images for scale. Let's look at documentation for PDF image. And here's how you can embed. Here's how you can use scale. And that's PDF images. Is that actually what we're getting? I don't think we are. Let's go back to document, embed, JPEG. What does it end up being? It resolves with a promise, resolves with the embedded image. So how do I know to use scale on that? I might have to search for it. Scale. Embedded page image. Okay, scale is on this page. It's right here. So here's an example of how to use scale in a couple different ways. And the way I did it was this way right here, which was passing in the decimal value between 0 and 1. So that's what we did here. Then we draw the image. Now you'll notice to draw the image, I have to tell it what page to draw on. Well, I used a variable called first page. What's that? That's this one. That's when we grabbed that first page. So I have to actually tell it to draw an image on a certain page. So that's the two things that make that magic work as far as if you have 20 pages, which page does it draw on? Well, whichever one you tell it to.
I do have a question here. Alex from YouTube says, how does, quote, the params, close quote, get declared, question mark? You're calling the parent function PDFEditor _ add image from FileMaker. I'm trying to figure out how it goes from the parent function to the, quote, sub function, close quote.
Okay, so let's follow that path all the way through. Okay, so here's all of our global fields sitting on our layout that we're going to capture all those parameters in. And there's all 7 of them right there, right? Okay, when you click this button, add image, it runs a script. Which script is that? That's this, run add image function. Okay, here's where I pull all of those 7 parameters out of global fields and I store them into a local variable here in the script. Then I do some validation and I exit if things aren't valid. But as long as everything's valid, here's where I say, okay, perform that function called PDFEditor _ add image. And here's where I pass in all of those variables as parameters, all 7 of them, in a particular order. First one's type, then the encoded image, then X and Y, scale, rotate, opacity. Okay, click OK, go back to code. In JavaScript, at the beginning of our function that calls right here, here's where those parameters come in the same order that I passed them from FileMaker, but now there's no names attached to that. So it's just passing values from FileMaker, right? It's not passing the name of these variables, it's just passing the values, whatever's in them. So in the JavaScript world, I can bring them in and call them anything I wish. And that's why there's kind of a naming change from type to image type, but they have to be in the same order.
Yep.
So the first one's type, the second one's image data, right? And then X and Y, and then scale, rotate, opacity. So those come in that exact order. And then I dump those to the console log later, not yet, but I dump those to the console log just to make sure I got the names all lined up right and everything's coming in, okay? But here's where they come in. Now, let's collapse this sub function or inner function because that's not going to run yet. Okay. After this function is called and we got the parameters in here, I'm going to create my own custom object. And here is where I'm going to take each one of those 7 individual variables and turn them into one object so that I can pass that one object to our next function. Now, here again, I kind of changed the naming scheme just so I don't get confused. I could just do the same name all the way through, but as a beginner developer, I don't want you to think that that's a requirement. You can change the names all the way along the line, okay? You can keep them the same if you wish, but that kind of leads to confusion because you're not really understanding how the trail, you're not able to follow the bouncing ball quite so easily if you name everything the same all the way through. Is that fair? So here I'm creating a new object with all 7 of those values with slightly different names, mostly. And you'll notice here's where I'm doing the conversion or guaranteeing that when I pass this to my function, that this X value is going to be an integer. I don't want it to be a string because I don't want anything to booger up or not work the way that I'm expecting. I need these two X and Y needs to be an int. The scale needs to be a float. The rotation needs to be an integer, and the opacity needs to be a float. So that's how you're kind of typecasting, but not really. You're doing a conversion. It's the exact same thing as get as number in FileMaker, or get as string, or get as date. You're guaranteeing that what you're getting is what you're expecting or wanting. Then I'm running my other function called add image, and I'm passing in that one object that contains all 7 of my parameters. Then if we go take a look at that function, here it is coming into the function as one object. All 7 of them are in there. And then I'm dumping them to the console log to make sure that I got them all in the right order and I gave them the right names, because now I'm going to start using them. And most of them are used right here in our draw image.
Okay.
So that was the bouncing ball all the way through. So hopefully whoever asked that question is nodding their head yes.
Codigo says it's ternary operator, not tertiary. So
Thank you.
ternary.
Yeah.
I thought you meant tertiary.
One of those fun words to.
I think they probably have a.
Yeah, tertiary is the third.
Third, right? Yeah.
Ternary. Okay, so after we've drawn the image on the first page, then what we do here is the same thing we've done before, which is save the entire document as a base64 encoded with the data URI turned on. And we're going to pass that back to our calling function. So as long as, now if any of that failed, it's going to trigger this catch. We kind of covered that before. And if we trigger the catch, it's just going to dump some information to the console log into FileMaker, so we know we got an error and we can go back and look at it. But as long as everything was happy, it's going to pass back our encoded PDF. That's going to come back to us here in our calling function here into the .then, which we will expand so we can see it. And it comes in and we call it return doc when it comes in. And what do we do with it? Well, we dump a console log message that it was successful. We store that returned completed document into our global again, so we can use it again to add more images to later if we wish. And then we return the entire thing to FileMaker to render in our web viewer. And there's a catch in case our add image failed. And as if you recall, if the try works, we'll get a .then. If the catch is triggered, we will probably still get a .then. And I have yet to figure out exactly when this catch is called. So I tend to put an error message in it just in case I see it someday, so that it doesn't just get blown past. But other than that, this typically, when I run things, doesn't seem to get triggered. So with that, we've covered the entire add image function, which is brand new in this particular section. And that was the walkthrough straight start to finish. So we can run it again. We'll initialize this. We'll dump the image on the screen. Let's change the opacity back to 1, change the rotation, I don't know, to 90, and clear it and rerun that. And it's mostly off the screen. Let's scoot it in a ways, 250, init, add image. There we go. We got it on the screen, turn 90 degrees. Okay, so you can kind of see, especially if you were paying close attention yesterday, that the add text and the add image are very similar. Mostly what you're dealing with is the other options you have based upon whether it's text, whether it's an image, whether it's a rectangle, whether it's an ellipse is what they call it over here in the documentation. So there's various things that you can add to a page. And basically, here's your options. You can draw a circle, you can draw an ellipse, you can draw an image, you can draw a line. Drawing a page, and yeah, don't try that one. Draw a rectangle, draw a square, draw an SVG path. So if you're into vector graphics and you understand how to generate SVG code or to read SVG code, copy and paste over. You can use that to draw it onto your PDF page, and you can draw text. So those are some very common methods that you can implement here using the same library. And as you know, with the finished PDF editor we saw on day one, I've got 5 of those here with these buttons: text, image, rectangle, ellipsis, and lines. But when it comes to learning how to do all of this, because they're so similar, I'm covering add text and add image, but after that, we're not going to do the other 3. You can look at those in the demo file. You can look at the code in case there's any questions. They obviously work here in the demo file, but we're not going to spend time covering those because they're so similar to things like add text. To add a rectangle is very similar. All they take is different parameters. Okay. Looks like Richard has disappeared temporarily, so let's move on to our next section. Marge, do we have any updated questions or comments?
Nope, not currently.
Okay.
I will say that Alex said that thank you for the explanation. So
good. Okay. All right. One of the conversations that we had on day one was page sizing, and we're actually going to cover it on this one because what we're going to do here is we are going to add a page to our document. So what's the difference between pages and documents? Well, as you know, a single PDF document can be more than one page. It can be hundreds or thousands of pages. So in code, you're able to add a page and you're able to choose the size of that page and its location as far as, well, where do you want to add it? So that's what we're going to cover now. So if I click on it, we've got our initial 1 page here. And I'm just going to, for now, pick a letter to add another page and hit the add page. And now if I scroll, you'll see that we now have 2 pages, where the second one's blank, and they're both letter size. Okay. I think if I just click it again, we should, yeah, we have 3 pages now. But now what gets interesting is if we change size. If we change it to A7 and click add page, well, now we've got 3 letters, 1, 2, 3, and a really tiny A7. And now if we add a legal, now we have 1 letter, 2 letter, 3 letter, an A7, and a legal. That is quite a bit bigger than the letter size. I'm not sure on the get size which one it's going to do. If I just run it, it looks like it's doing the last page. So right there's the size of the legal, which is what, page number 4 now? And it's got a height of 1008. So we'll take a look at that code. And then we can add text probably to the last page also. So we'll add Richard at 250, 100 with, let's change rotation to 0. Let's hit add text. And if we go take a look, there's page 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And here's the legal page 5. And there's the tiny little Richard down there at position 250 across and 100 up from the bottom. So with that, we also have a container here now of the outgoing PDF. So if I right click on that, hit export field contents and save this to disk, and my downloads folder automatically open, that'll save. I'll replace the existing one. We'll open this in our preview app and you can see exactly what we're expecting. There's page 1, there's 2, there's 3, there's a tiny 4, there's a large long 5 with Richard down there at the bottom. So now we're starting to work with outgoing PDF, which is a container. And we're not only rendering it here in our web viewer, but we're actually turning it into a finalized file sitting in our FileMaker container, still with 0 records on the screen. And here's, it shows our file name down here at the bottom in case you're trying to find it in your file system and you can't find it. Okay, that was a lot, but now we start to look at code. That is section 6 right here. If we take a look at our web viewer, it should look familiar. It's pretty much exactly the same as we've always had up until now. And again, I have some JavaScript walkthrough down here that kind of elaborates on some new things in this section that you haven't seen before, along with reference material to look at your leisure. If we take a look at the actual JavaScript sitting in there, I will select all, copy that, move that over to Visual Studio Code, wiping out the existing code. Now we have 243 lines. So if we scroll all the way to the top, let's collapse these to see these a little better. Our first function is create. Second function is get size. And our third function is add page. Our fourth function is add text. So the add image is gone. And we're kind of back to our original 3 plus the add page. So then we're going to dive down into that. If we look at our create, I don't think in glancing through that there's anything changing here. It's the same that it has been. That just creates one page and writes some text onto it. The text says creating PDFs in JavaScript is awesome on page 1. So that gives us our initial PDF to work with. Let's collapse that. Nope, not that one. Let's collapse this one. Our get size function. And here we will be able to confirm yes, right here. Instead of always getting the size of page 0, now I'm passing in the document, the entire document, and I'm pulling out, oh, what I'm doing here is a new function we haven't looked at yet. Let's look at this one. Get page count. So in documentation on the document, PDF document, get page count right here is a method that we can run. And when we run that, we get back a number, and it's the number of pages in our document. So that's how I was able to always get the size of the last page, no matter how many pages we had. Okay, so this creates a variable called total pages, and we use that method to get back a number of how many documents are in that document that we loaded. And where am I getting that doc? Same place I had before, that stored variable right there at our root. So we're always passing that in as a parameter now, so that we can always use whatever's in there currently to modify it and do things like get size. So we load the doc in, we get the page count, and this function right here actually gets all of the pages and stores them here in our pages variable. And again, that's an array of pages. So if we have 4 pages, you'll have indexes 0, 1, 2, and 3. So last page now is a variable. And what I do is I look in the pages array object that we have there from the last step, and I pull out total pages minus 1. Why did I do minus 1? Because it's a 0 index. So my 4th page is 4 minus 1, or index 3. So this will always pull out the last page, no matter how many pages are in there. Once we have that last page, then I'm using the same get size method on it to get back the width and the height. I'm creating my custom object that I will pass over to the console log and back to our calling function to pass on to FileMaker. Same as we've done before. So that's the only change here on get size, is making it, instead of always grab the size of page 0 or the first page, index 0 or first page, now I'm always pulling back in this particular function, the last page of the document. So let's collapse that. Add text. We'll skip that one and go straight. We'll skip add page and go down to add text, because this is probably pretty similar to our original adding text on our document, which we ended up with yesterday. And I think the only change I really made here is, again, where it's going to make the change. And instead of it always being on page 0, I'm doing it on the last page of the document, just like I did on sizing. Still using the Helvetica font, still using the parameters coming in as far as where to place the text, still dumping all of the incoming parameters to the console log so that I can see that I'm in my child function, that I've got all of my data coming in as I'm anticipating, still saving it, passing it back out. So all of the add text is also pretty much the same as it has been before. The only thing that's brand new now is this add page function. Let's collapse the child function inside so we can look at it, and you'll notice it has the exact same structure we've been using forever for all of these functions. Matter of fact, if we collapse the catch and the dot then, you can see here's our function in its kind of its root structure, I suppose is what we can call it. Not a whole lot of variation, keeping it pretty much the same. Now, is this required to do in all of your JavaScript coding? Of course not. This is just for this particular solution. This was just an easy way to be fairly consistent with every function we write for all of these different options that we can do in our PDF pages. So again, I have a child function or a sub function called add page. Here's where we're calling it. What are we passing in? We're passing in a single object, which is a custom object of all my incoming parameters. So instead of passing 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 parameters into a function, passing those around all the time, I just pass in one object. Makes it a lot cleaner. Okay. So with that, let's go look at the child function, which is where all of the work happens, right here. Okay. So we have our parameters coming in. By the way, what are we passing in? We're passing in the entire PDF doc and a page size that we're interested in. Why are we passing that in? Well, if you recall, that was one of our options we had here in FileMaker right here, page size, so that we can pick a size. Now, are you limited to these three? Nope. But I chose those three here for this editor. And for those of you, you might consider it a little bit of a JavaScript coding challenge for you to go through and make some more options available here in FileMaker and pass that information all the way through to the final result and get back the page size that you're anticipating. But let me show you how you would go about doing that. So we have that, the chosen page size coming in as a parameter. I'm dumping that to the console log so I can see what's coming in. Then I'm loading my document, same as we've done before with the incoming string PDF document coming in. I'm creating a PDF document object here that we use from our library. And then I'm doing a switch statement. Now, remember, this is something we learned in JavaScript 101. This is very similar with FileMaker's case statement. So what is it we're doing? Well, we are taking in the page size that came in from the user, and we are converting it into the code actually needed for our library to actually generate that page. So if the user chose A7 or legal or anything else, this is our default, then what we're doing is we're setting a local variable called which size, which I declared up here. And we're setting that which size to page sizes dot something. Well, where do I figure that out? Well, let's go look at documentation. Page sizes. Okay, let's do a search for page sizes just to quickly find it. And this looks like a good spot right here. Oh, yes. Here's all of our different page sizes we can choose from. So Richard, you were asking before day one, these are all of the options of how many different page sizes you can pick from. You can see why I narrowed it down to 3.
My God, right?
That's a lot of options, isn't it?
That's yeah, because all we actually have here is what, letter and legal, and then what, 11 by 17, and that's it, pretty much.
Well, 11 by 17 is legal, right? Or is that 8.5
No,
by
11 by 17 is like double the, it's like giant format.
So in our actual function, when we are loading up our document and we're going to be adding a page, we use our switch statement to determine which size, and that converts the user's choice in FileMaker, these A7 and legal, to what we need in code, which is page sizes.a7, page sizes.legal, and our default is page sizes.letter. So once we have that, we can use the function add page. And what parameter does it take? One of those 3 sizes right there, but it has to be in that format. It can't be what the user chose. That was the user readable friendly version. And here's where we do the conversion to the code version.
Okay, got it.
So this adds a page to the document, and it's always at the end. And once we've added it, then we save it and we return it. So pretty straightforward, not a whole lot to it to add a page to our PDF. And as we already looked at, everything else in our function is pretty much the same kind of structure that we've used before.
Okay.
Nothing's really changed. The only thing that's changing is our child function and what it does. Okay. But it's always returning a final result that we're storing and passing on to FileMaker. So we covered add text yesterday. We covered add image earlier today. And now we, did I say that right? Add image today. And now we just finished up add page.
Add page, yeah.
I'm not sure whether we should split the next 3 over to Monday or whether or not we should try to cram another one in today.
Well, can you do 4 in a day on Monday, or?
Well, we only have 3 left. The last one is the completed editor.
Oh, I see.
We probably should try to cram another one in.
Yeah, then go ahead and do
just so we have a little bit more time on Monday. So this is how we can take an existing PDF and load it rather than create one from scratch. And then we can modify it. Okay.
Yeah, that's super.
So we have a new
Yeah.
So we have a new container on the layout, and that's where we're going to dump our incoming PDF, and it can be any PDF. And when we initialize that, oops, I have some scripts I did I modify a script? I don't remember. Save it all. So here it is loaded. Instead of creating a brand new one, I've got a 3-page loaded PDF document in here now, and that came from this container. And now we can add page to the end of it just like we did before. Richard, pick our size here. What are we going to add to the end?
Let's just keep it letter for now. Keep it for me.
We'll add letter.
Yeah, add letter.
And there's our first 3 pages, and there's our new letter at the end.
Okay, great.
Now the get size will get the size at the last page, and there it is. And now let's add, well, actually, let's go back and initialize so we don't have a new page. We just have those three. Let's add Richard to the last one. So now we've got three. Oh, it's hiding underneath here. There it is. There's Richard sitting right there that we added. Now we can add a page, and now that page is there, and now the new page is here. Okay. So again, like we did last time, now we have an outgoing PDF container as well. And if we export that and automatically open and replace the one that we already had, now we have our page 1, page 2, page 3 with Richard that we added, and page 4, the new letter that we just added that's blank. Okay. So now here in FileMaker, now we have two new containers, an incoming PDF and an outgoing PDF, and our web viewer for preview purposes. Okay. So not a whole lot changing, but man, look at how busy our layout's getting. We just keep adding a little bit more every time, right? So now if we look at that code, that is section 7, load PDF. And as you can probably guess, our web viewer code is identical to what we've been doing before. The only thing that's changed is our JavaScript. If we capture all of that and dump it into Visual Studio Code, select all, delete, paste. Let's go through and collapse things so that we can see what we got. We, instead of create now, we have load. So that's going to be a new function we'll look at here in a minute. Get size probably has not changed at all. Add page has probably not changed at all. Add text has probably not changed at all. So the only thing new here is we have a new function called load. So let's go look at that. Let's collapse our child function. Let's collapse our .then and our .catch. And you can see our function looks identical to all of our other function structures. So we're keeping it simple and the same. And again, that's not required. You can do it any way you wish, but this is a nice structure I used for this entire project that I can just copy paste, keep using. And once you get it to work once, it works forever on, for all the other functions too. So that's a side benefit. So I have one incoming parameter. I'm passing it right to our child parameter. And when it gets it, it's just slightly naming it different, but there's the parameter going into our child function.
Okay.
Let's look at that because that's where all the work happens. And you can see we don't have much going on here. We simply call load on the incoming file. So it's exactly the same as loading the file that we created. So whether it's an incoming PDF or a brand new one you're creating from code, same exact possibility or functionality when it comes to loading it. So that's really beneficial and streamlined and efficient. Then once we've loaded it, we just turn around and convert it to base 64 the same way we had before and pass it back out. So that is it. I mean, there's not much going on there. Take an incoming base 64 encoded document and load it up and store it in our global. That's all we're doing. Now, how did I do that from FileMaker? That's about the only thing I haven't explained yet, right? Let's look at that.
Yep.
So loading PDF, here's where we populate our working web viewer. So down here is where we, after it's all loaded in our web viewer on line 67, this is where we wait 1/10 of a second before we perform our very first JavaScript function, which in the past has always been create, but this time it's going to be load. And what are we passing in as a parameter? Single parameter called encoded file.
Okay.
And what's that? Well, that was right here. That's FileMaker doing the work. Same thing you saw before, which is passing in the contents of that container and doing a base 64 encode using this line right here.
Okay.
And right here, I'm actually doing a little bit of validation so that if that container is empty, it stops things and doesn't continue and alerts the user, hey, incoming PDF cannot be blank here in this particular section. Since we're trying to learn about loading a PDF, probably need a PDF to load. So other than that, that's the slight change here in our code here. This is the same. This is the button that runs the add page. And here's where we call it and pass in our size. Here's our button for get size, here's where we call it in the web viewer, PDFEditor _ size. And here's our add text, same as before. We grab 4 parameters for adding text, right? And we pass them all in right here, all in a specific order that needs to match our code. And When we load or we add things, this is the script that runs, that pulls it into FileMaker. So we grab the incoming document from JavaScript. I just happen to store it in a global variable so you can stare at it if you wish for debugging. But I toss that into the preview web viewer. And now I do something new that we haven't done before, which is I save this to a container. So how do I do that? Right here, I take the raw incoming data and I have to parse out. I have to remove that data URI. This stuff right here. Remember how we purposely were adding it so that we could see a preview in our web viewer? You can't have that when you save it to disk. And that's the difference. This is only required in a browser, and this will cause things to fail if you try to save that to disk. It just needs the raw base64 encoded PDF data. That's all it needs. The .pdf tells the operating system what the file type is, where the browser doesn't understand a file extension. This is what's required for the browser to render a PDF.
Okay.
Make sense?
Yep.
Once I have that raw encoding without that data URI, then I can set it into the field, and I have to base64 decode it. And FileMaker's decode function, the second parameter is what file name you want to use. So there it is there. And I commit the record and it's done. And here's the script that runs same as before when we hit the get size function. So with all of that, we've totally explained from start to finish today how to add an image, add a page, and load an existing PDF. We're almost wrapping this up.
Yeah,
that's where we'll end today. How are we with questions and comments?
Quiet.
So as a teaser for Monday, what we're going to cover on Monday is get page and merge PDFs. And what that allows you to do is take existing PDFs and merge them together in whatever order that you want. You can insert it where you wish, which is kind of the reason why I created this editor in the first place, because that's the real life situation that I was trying to solve that you can't do in FileMaker. So once we wrap those two up, we will once again just kind of check out the full-blown finished working editor. And as time allows, we might kind of breeze over or take questions for JavaScript 101, 102, or 103 we've been doing for the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, so Monday is going to be the last of the free events. It's going to be bring your open Q&A, open questions, right? Yep. Rick, thank you very much. So Monday we added Monday. It wasn't originally part of the deal, but we're adding Monday. And then, so that's like 1 o'clock to 2 o'clock Pacific time. Then at 3 o'clock Pacific, which is later in the day for us, some of you, it's much later in the day, we will kick off the next, week 3, the next step, right? Once again, for those of you who are paying for this and supporting it, we greatly appreciate your contributions to making all that happen. Yeah, if you take a look at the upcoming the website right here, to go to fmtrain.tv. Actually, if you fmtrain.tv is the only link you have to really remember. Then you on the nav across here, you just JavaScript training brings us to Leland, and if you want to support, come in the chat, come into the week 3 and get the recordings. I know I'm beating on this, but I want to make sure that people have this opportunity to do this, because I don't think you're going to have too many other people teaching you the basics of React, native React, building iOS and Android apps with using FileMaker servers at backend. I mean, I'm sure you could pay someone on a $200 per hour to train you how to do it one-on-one, but if you want to have those are probably 90-minute days every day. That's probably 7 or 8 hours of training. Yeah, it's going to be pretty awesome. So another terrific day. Thanks to Leland RCC from Larry. Greatly appreciate it. Leah Scott Kane says, Leland, great stuff. Yeah, some of the people here are definitely looking forward to next week. All right. It's Friday. It's a good time to have a beer and kick it. Margaret, are you good? Are we good here?
Yes, we are. So
1, 2, 3, go.
individual up here who maybe a FileMaker license. Well, it's potentially expired. Look at the back of that car right there. Looks like the FileMaker license has expired. Sir, I need you to step out of the vehicle. Sir, step out of the vehicle. Sir!